6 stories tonight, all of them Craigslist, all of them real. I am going to move through these with enough depth that each one lands the way it deserves to, but I am also going to keep the pace moving because I want you to get through all 6, and I want the last one to hit you the way it hit me when I first heard it. A woman who answered a furniture listing and noticed something in the photos before she ever left her house. A man who listed his truck for sale and spent a week realizing the buyer was not interested in the truck. A college student who took a cleaning job at a vacant property and found out the property was not as vacant as she had been told. A couple who listed their house for rent and had one applicant who knew things about the house that no applicant should have known. A man who answered a pet listing and recognized something in the animal that told him what kind of household it had come from. And the 6th story, the one I am asking you to stay for, from a woman who received a response to her Craigslist listing that at first seemed like a misfire, but turned out to be one of the most deliberate things anyone has ever described to me. Names changed, accounts real, let us start. Story 1, the photo. My name is Wendy. I was 27 years old, living in an apartment in Denver, Colorado, furnishing my first real place on a budget that required me to be creative. Craigslist was my primary source for everything large. Couch, dining table, bookshelves. All of it sourced through listings I had spent real time finding and vetting. I had gotten good at reading listing photos the way any experienced buyer does. You learn to look past the primary subject of the image and pay attention to what is visible in the background, reflections in windows, conditions of surrounding areas, details that tell you something about the seller and the environment that the listing itself does not. The listing I found for a dining table was clean and well photographed. 4 images good, light the table shown from multiple angles with the chairs around it. The price was fair for the quality. The seller's account had activity history. Everything on the surface was right. I was looking at the 4th photo, the one showing the table from the far end of the room, when I noticed something in the background. The room the table was in had a doorway, visible at the far end, leading to a hallway. In the hallway, partially visible through the doorway, was a woman. Not the person who had taken the photo. A different person standing in the hallway, partially obscured by the doorframe, looking toward the camera. I stared at this for a while. It was possible this was simply a family member who had wandered into frame. It was possible it was a coincidence of framing and shadow that looked like a person, but was something else. I zoomed in as far as the image resolution would allow. It was a person. A woman standing in the hallway partially behind the doorframe, looking toward the room where the photo was being taken. Her posture was not the relaxed posture of someone who had accidentally walked into a photo. She was pressed against the side of the doorframe, partially concealed, watching. I looked at the other 3 photos. In the 2nd photo, which showed the table from the side, the doorway was also partially visible. The hallway was empty in that image. Only in the 4th photo, only when the camera angle was pointed directly at the doorway. I messaged the seller and asked about the price and a few neutral questions. He responded promptly and was friendly and offered to have me come by that evening. I asked if he lived alone, and he said yes, just him. His roommate had moved out recently. Just him. No one else in the house. I looked at the 4th photo again. The woman in the hallway looking toward the camera, partially concealed by the doorframe. I did not go to see the table. I forwarded the photo to my friend Camille, who looked at it for a long time before she said, "That is a person in that hallway, and that person does not want to be seen." She said it with a quietness that told me she understood what I was sitting with. I filed a report with Denver police. I sent them the listing URL in the photo and described what I had observed. The officer I spoke to said they would look into it and took my contact information. I received a call 9 days later from a detective who thanked me for the report and said the address had been flagged for follow-up. She did not share additional details. She asked me if I had visited the property, and when I said no, she said good, and she said it in a tone that told me more than the word itself. I found a different dining table at a different listing. I met the seller in a parking lot in broad daylight, and the table was fine. Look at the full frame of every listing photo. Look at doorways and windows and reflections and corners. Look at what is visible in the parts of the image that are not the thing being sold. Sometimes the most important thing in a Craigslist photo is in the background. Story 2, The Truck. My name is Aaron. I was 38 years old and living in Boise, Idaho when I listed my truck for sale on Craigslist. A 2014 Ford F25. Oh, good condition, reasonable mileage, priced fairly at just under $18,000. I had owned the truck for 4 years and was upgrading, and I listed it with a full set of photos and a detailed description on a Monday morning. The first serious inquiry came in that afternoon from a man who said his name was Craig. He was thorough in his questions, asked about maintenance history, whether the truck had been in any accidents, what the towing capacity was given the specific trim level. Real questions that reflected genuine knowledge of the vehicle. We exchanged several messages over Monday evening, and he said he wanted to come see it Tuesday afternoon. He arrived Tuesday at 4. He looked the truck over in my driveway for about 20 minutes, checked under the hood, looked at the bedliner test, drove it around the block, with me in the passenger seat. He knew what he was doing. He asked about my asking price and said he wanted to think about it and would be in touch by Thursday. I thought I was probably going to sell the truck to this man. Thursday came, and Craig texted that he was still interested but had a few more questions. We texted back and forth for a while, and the questions started shifting in a way that I did not immediately identify as wrong. He asked about my commute and whether I used the truck daily. He asked whether I stored the truck in the garage or in the driveway. He asked what my schedule looked like on weekends, framing it as wanting to know when a good time would be for him to come back for a second look. I answered the schedule question and told him Saturday morning worked well because I was typically home until noon. He came back Saturday, second look, same thoroughness, same knowledge, same vague commitment. He said he needed 1 more week to sort out his financing and then he would be ready to move forward. I said fine. The following week, he continued to text with questions that had less and less to do with the truck. He asked about the neighborhood, whether it was quiet, whether there was much foot traffic on my street. He asked whether my wife drove the truck, or whether it was exclusively mine. I mentioned offhand that my wife was out of town visiting family for 10 days, and he said, "Oh, so you have the house to yourself, that must be nice." I put my phone down after that text and looked at it sitting on the table and felt something settle into place that I had been not quite looking at for several days. The questions about my schedule, the questions about where I stored the truck, the questions about whether it was me or my wife who drove it, and now the knowledge that I was alone in the house for 10 days. Craig had not asked a single question about the truck in 4 days. I texted back and told him I had decided to sell the truck to someone else and wished him luck. He replied within 2 minutes and said he had been very interested and asked why I had changed my mind. I said I had received another offer and left it at that. He texted one more time asking if I would reconsider. I did not reply. I called my brother-in-law that evening and told him the full sequence. He said the thing that told him the most was the question about my wife being out of town. He said that is not a question a truck buyer asks. He said, report it and then call your wife and let her know what you are telling me right now. I filed a report with the Boise police the following morning and gave them Craig's phone number and every text message in the exchange. An officer went through the messages and said, The progression I had identified from vehicle questions to personal schedule and household questions was something they had seen before in the context of both targeted theft and other categories of crimes against persons. I sold the truck 3 weeks later to a man who came with his wife Tess, drove it once, paid by cashier's check, and shook my hand. The whole thing took 45 minutes, and nobody asked me a single question about my schedule or whether I lived alone. When you're selling something of value privately, you're going to talk to people you do not know. Keep that communication focused on the item. The moment the questions start being about you, your schedule, your household, your routine, the item has ceased to be the point of the conversation. Understand that clearly and act on it. Story 3. The cleaning job. My name is Rosa. I was 21 years old, a sophomore at the University of Washington in Seattle, looking for part-time work that would fit around my class schedule. I found a Craigslist listing for a one-time cleaning job at a vacant property, $15 an hour, estimated 4 to 6 hours of work, flexible start time. The listing said the property had recently had tenants move out and needed a thorough clean before new tenants arrived. Standard turnover cleaning. I responded and heard back from a man who said his name was Mitchell. He said he was the property manager for a small portfolio of rental units in the Seattle area and needed someone reliable for occasional turnover cleaning. He said if this first job went well, he would be happy to call me for future cleanings. He gave me an address in the Beacon Hill neighborhood and said I could come any morning that week between 9 and noon. I went on a Wednesday at 9:30. The address was a single-story house on a residential street. I had a key code Mitchell had given me for the lockbox on the door. I opened it, got the key inside, and let myself in. The house was not fully vacant. There was no furniture in the main living areas, which matched what I'd expected from a recently vacated rental. But in the back bedroom, there were personal items. Not packed items, not items staged for removal. Items in use. A sleeping bag on the floor, unrolled and clearly recently slept in. A duffel bag against the wall with clothes visible through the partially open zipper. A phone charger plugged into the wall outlet with the cord coiled neatly. A paper coffee cup on the floor near the sleeping bag, relatively recent, judging by its condition. I stood in the doorway of that room for about 30 seconds. Then I walked back to the front door quickly and went outside and stood in the driveway and called my friend Anya. I told her what I had found. She said, "Leave right now and call the number for the man who hired you and tell him what you found. If he acts like he does not know about it, call the police." I called Mitchell. He answered, and I told him there were personal items in the back bedroom, and it did not look like the property was vacant. There was a pause before he responded. He said that was strange, and he would look into it, and asked if I could still do the cleaning in the other rooms. I said I was not comfortable being in the house alone given what I'd seen, and that I needed him to come to the property first so we could figure out what was going on together. Another pause. He said he was across town and it would take him a while. I said I would wait outside. I did not wait outside. I got in my car and drove to a coffee shop 2 blocks away and texted him the coffee shop address and said I was waiting there. He texted back and said he was not going to be able to make it after all and that he would reschedule the cleaning for another day. I texted him back and said I was going to file a police report about what I had found. He did not respond to that message. I filed the report with the Seattle Police non-emergency line from the coffee shop. I gave them the property address, Mitchell's name and number, the key code he had given me, and a description of what I had found in the back bedroom. The officer I spoke to asked me several questions and said they would send a unit to the address. An officer called me back 2 hours later. He said the property had been accessed by someone who was not authorized to be there, and that the situation was being handled by the appropriate unit. He asked me not to return to the address. I looked up the property address online that evening. The owner of record was a woman whose name was not Mitchell. Mitchell was not a licensed property manager in Washington state that I could find. The property had not been listed as a rental anywhere I could find. Someone had given me a key code to a property they did not own or manage, told me the property was vacant when it was not, and sent me inside alone. I have thought about what I was supposed to find when I walked through that door and what was supposed to happen after that. I have thought about the person whose sleeping bag was in that back bedroom and what they knew about who was coming through the front door at 9:30 that Wednesday morning. I have never taken a cleaning job from an individual listing since. Agency work only with verified references and a physical office address. It costs slightly less per hour. It is worth the difference every single time. Story 4. The rental application. My name is David. I was 42 years old, and my wife Lorraine and I were preparing to rent out the house we had lived in for 8 years while we relocated to Portland for my job. We had owned the house in Eugene, Oregon, and decided to rent rather than sell. We listed it on Craigslist and several other rental platforms and began taking applications. The applications came in steadily over the first week. Most were straightforward, and we went through them using the standard screening criteria: income verification, references, rental history. One application was different, and I want to describe precisely how. The applicant gave his name as Thomas. His application was thorough and professional. Income documentation included a reference letter from a previous landlord attached. On paper, he was one of the stronger applicants in the pool. We scheduled a showing. Thomas came to the showing on a Saturday afternoon. He was polite and seemed genuinely interested in the house as a home. He asked the questions a serious tenant asks about utility costs and lease terms and the maintenance process, but he also asked questions that were not on that list. He asked about the neighbors on the left side of our house by name, not the neighbors' names. He referenced them by a detail. He said something like, "Your neighbors with the big dog, the ones who have lived here a while?" We did have neighbors with a large dog, and they had lived there longer than we had. But nothing in our listing or our showing description had mentioned our neighbors or their dog. Thomas had knowledge of our neighbors that he shouldn't have had from the application process alone. Lorraine caught it before I did. She gave me a look, and I replayed what he had just said and felt the temperature of the conversation shift for me. He also knew the house had a crawl space. He asked about it specifically and correctly. He said something about the crawl space access on the north side of the house. The crawl space access was on the north side. It was a small exterior panel in an unobtrusive location that I would not have expected a first-time visitor to identify or mention. It was not in any of our listing photos. After the showing, I told Thomas we had several applications to review and would be in touch. He left. Lorraine and I stood in our living room, and I said what I was thinking, which was that he knows things about this house and this street that are not in the listing. She said she had been thinking exactly that since the neighbor comment. We did not select Thomas. We wrote him a polite rejection and moved on. 3 weeks after we had moved to Portland, and our selected tenants had moved in, our new tenant called me. She said there had been a man at the house who had walked around the exterior slowly and tried the door of the crawl space access panel on the north side. She'd seen him from the window. She had called out to ask if she could help him, and he had walked back to the street and driven away. She said he looked to be around 40 average build, wearing a light jacket. She had not gotten the plate. I described Thomas as best I could, and she said the description was consistent with what she had seen. I filed a report with the Eugene police. I gave them Thomas's full name as he had given it on the application and the phone number he had provided. An officer called me back several days later and said the contact information Thomas had provided on the application connected to accounts that could not be verified as belonging to a real individual with that name, and that the matter was being handled by the appropriate unit. I do not know who Thomas actually was. I do not know what he was looking for at my house or what the crawl space represented to him specifically. I know he knew things about the property and the street that required more than a single visit to learn, and that after we rejected his application, he went back to the house. Anyway, when you are renting out a property, the showing is an access event. Someone is inside your home, learning its layout, noting its specific features, identifying its access points. Screen every applicant before the showing, not after. And pay very close attention to any applicant who knows things about your property that you did not tell them. That knowledge came from somewhere, and it is worth understanding where before you hand anyone a key. Story 5, The Dog. My name is Calvin. I was 33 years old and living in Raleigh, North Carolina when this happened. I want to be honest about the emotional context of the story because I think it is important. I had lost my dog 2 months before this, and I was not fully over it. And I was probably looking at pet listings before I was ready, because grief does not follow a reasonable timeline. I found a listing for a 3-year-old male Labrador mix being rehomed due to the owner relocating for work. The posting described the dog as house-trained, good, with kids up to date on shots. There was a photo of a yellow lab mix sitting in a kitchen, looking toward the camera, calm-eyed and well-groomed. The man who responded said his name was Frank. He was friendly and asked me appropriate questions about my living situation and whether I had experience with dogs. We arranged for me to come meet the dog on a Saturday afternoon. The address was a house in a residential area of Raleigh. Frank answered the door and led me through to the backyard where the dog was. The dog's name was given as Buddy. He was a good-looking animal, healthy weight, clean coat, responsive when called. I crouched down and let him come to me, and he did tail moving, no hesitation. I spent about 15 minutes with the dog, and I liked him. He was calm and well-mannered, and I could tell he had been handled regularly and treated well. I was genuinely thinking about saying yes. Then I noticed something. On the dog's inner left ear flap, visible when he turned his head, was a small tattoo. A number 4 digits, the kind used by responsible breeders to identify dogs from their breeding program. I had seen this before with my previous dog, who had come from a breeder who used the same system. I had never thought much about it until now. I asked Frank where he had gotten the dog originally. He said from a friend who had bought him from a breeder. I asked if he had any paperwork from the original breeder. He said he did not. The friend had not passed it along. I noted the tattoo number on my phone while the dog was close enough for me to read it clearly. I said I wanted to think about it overnight, and I would let him know tomorrow. Frank said that was fine. When I got home, I contacted the American Kennel Club and the breeder registry associated with the tattoo prefix to ask about the number. It took 2 days to get a response. When it came, it told me the dog had been registered to a woman in Cary, North Carolina, whose name and address were in the registry. I searched her name and the word dog online and found a Facebook post from 6 weeks prior. The post was from this woman asking for help finding her dog, a yellow lab mix named Chester, who had gone missing from her backyard. The post had a photo. It was the same dog. The dog sitting in Frank's backyard, whose name Frank had given as Buddy, was Chester, a stolen dog belonging to a woman in Cary who had been looking for him for 6 weeks. I called the Raleigh police immediately and gave them Frank's address, his phone number, the Craigslist listing, and the registry information, and the Facebook post. I also found the woman's Facebook account and sent her a message telling her I believed I had found her dog. She called me 20 minutes after I sent the message, and she was crying before she finished saying hello. An officer went to Frank's address that evening. The dog was recovered and returned to his owner. Frank was charged with possession of stolen property. The case moved through the system, and I was contacted once by a detective to confirm my account of the interaction. I think about the tattoo. 4 digits on the inside of an ear flap, the kind of thing you would only see if you crouched down close to an animal and he turned his head just right. If I had not known to look for it, I would not have seen it. If I had not known what it meant, I would not have known to record the number. If I had simply said yes and brought Chester home, I would have been in possession of someone's stolen dog without knowing it, and the owner in Cary would have kept searching. Chester and his owner have each other back. That part of the story ends the way it should. But the part that does not end is the understanding of what was happening in that backyard with Frank, patiently waiting for the right buyer. Someone who would pay cash, no questions asked, no paperwork needed for a calm, well-mannered dog that had clearly been someone's beloved pet. If you are adopting or buying a pet through a private listing, look for registration tattoos or microchips. Ask for paperwork. Ask where the animal came from with enough specificity to verify. And if anything about the animal's condition or demeanor suggests it was well cared for by someone who is not the person in front of you, ask yourself how it got from that person to this one and whether the answer makes sense. Story 6, The Misdirected Message. My name is Helen. I was 35 years old and living alone in an apartment in Cincinnati, Ohio. I had listed a set of vintage cameras on Craigslist, a hobby collection I had decided to part with, cameras, lenses, a light meter, a few accessories, priced fairly good photos, detailed descriptions of each piece. I posted on a Tuesday evening. Wednesday morning, I had several responses. Most were from photography enthusiasts asking about specific pieces, the kind of knowledgeable questions that told me the respondents knew what they were looking at. I was going through them at my kitchen table with my coffee when I opened one that was different. The message appeared to be a response to my camera listing, but the content had nothing to do with cameras. It read like the middle of a conversation. It said, and I am going to read this as close to exactly as I can remember, because the specific language matters. Still watching the schedule, she is consistent. Leaves between 7:15 and 7:30 every morning. Back between 5:45 and 6:15. Lights out by 10:30. Most nights. Does not appear to have regular visitors. Ground floor unit confirmed accessible from the east side. Recommend moving forward this week while the pattern holds. I read that message 3 times. It was addressed to me, meaning it had been sent to my Craigslist listing. But it was not written to me. It was written as a report about a person, a woman whose schedule had been observed and documented, whose home had been assessed for access, and for whom a recommendation was being made to move forward this week. I sat at my kitchen table and looked at that message and tried to find an explanation that was not what it appeared to be. A prank. A message sent to the wrong listing by someone in the middle of a creative writing project. Some kind of role play or game that I had been accidentally copied into. I could not find one that held. The language was too specific, too functional, too lacking in any quality of performance. It read like an operational update. A person reporting to another person about a third person who did not know she was being observed. I looked at the sender's account. A Craigslist account. with no listing history and no photo created recently. The kind of account created for a single transaction and nothing more. I called my sister first. She listened to me read the message out loud and was quiet for a moment and then said, "Call the police right now tonight." Not the non-emergency line. She said, "What you just read to me is a surveillance report on a real woman and someone sent it to you by mistake." I called the Cincinnati Police Department and asked to speak with an officer immediately. I explained that I had received a message through Craigslist that appeared to be surveillance documentation of an individual sent to the wrong account. The officer who took the call asked me to come to the precinct and bring my phone. I went that evening. A detective met with me and read the message carefully. She asked me several questions about the timing of the response, whether I had responded to it in any way, and whether I had any context for the account that sent it. I had not responded. I had no context for the account. The detective said the message content was being taken seriously and that they were going to pursue what they could through Craigslist's law enforcement cooperation process to identify the account. She said if I received any further messages from that account or any other account that seemed related, I should forward them immediately and not respond. I heard back from the detective 11 days later. She said the account had been traced to an IP address and that the matter was being handled by the appropriate investigative unit. She thanked me for coming forward quickly and said the speed of my report had been important. She did not tell me who the woman in the message was. She did not tell me whether they had found her before anything had happened to her or after. She did not tell me what moving forward this week had meant to the person who had written those words. I asked her one question. I asked whether the woman was all right. The detective paused for a moment and then said the investigation was active and ongoing, and she was not able to discuss specifics. I have thought about that pause many times since. I have thought about what it meant and what it did not mean and what it might have meant. I do not have an answer. I have the detective's card in my desk drawer, and I have looked at it many times without calling the number on it, because I am not sure I want to know more specifically than I already do. What I know is that someone sent a surveillance report to the wrong Craigslist inbox, that whoever sent it made a mistake in the account they directed it to, and that the mistake brought it to someone who read it for what it was and made a phone call the same night. I think about what would have happened if that message had gone to someone who had glanced at it, been confused, and deleted it, or someone who had seen it as spam and blocked the account, or someone who had thought about it for a day or two before doing anything. I made the call the same night. I want to say that plainly because I think it matters, not the next morning, not after I had thought about it for a while. The same night. If you receive something through any online platform that should not have come to you, that reads like documentation or planning or coordination that has nothing to do with you, do not delete it. Do not archive it. Do not wait to see if anything else comes. Call and report it immediately because somewhere there is a real person who does not know what is being planned around her, and the speed of your call might be the difference that matters. 6 stories. A photo with something in the background that should not have been there. A truck sale that became a personal surveillance operation. A cleaning job at a house that was not vacant. A rental application from someone who already knew too much about the property. A dog with a 4-digit tattoo that told the truth about where he came from. And a misdirected message that landed in the wrong inbox on a Wednesday morning in Cincinnati. All 6 of these happened through the same platform. A platform most of us use without much thought for transactions we consider ordinary. The platform did not create any of what these people experienced, but it provided access. And access is a thing that every single one of the people on the other side of these stories was actually looking for. Read your messages carefully. Look at the full frame of every photo. Ask yourself why a buyer is asking about your schedule. Verify before you show. Look for the tattoo on the ear. And if something lands in your inbox that was not meant for you, and that tells you something terrible about something happening to someone else, make the call the same night. Drop a comment telling me which of these 6 got under your skin the most. I read every single one. Subscribe if you are not already, and hit the bell so you catch next week the day it goes up. Stay sharp and stay safe out there.